Os doy la bienvenida a todo el mundo por estar aquí en este seminario Inclusiones estéticas del capitaloceno con NICOLAS BOURRIAUD. Aquí también le damos las gracias por haber hecho un hueco a Murcia en medio de tanto viaje y de tanto trasiego que lleva últimamente. Y estamos, la verdad, que bastante contentos por muchísimas razones, ¿no? La primera es evidentísima, ¿no? Tener una figura como NICOLAS BOURRIAUD, probablemente todo el mundo lo conozca, ¿no? Comisario, crítico de arte, pensador. Le venía preguntando cómo se definiría él y dice que un comisario que escribe, ¿no? Pero yo creo que es alguien que es muchísimo más, es un pensador en todos los en el sentido muy amplio del término, alguien que piensa el arte, quien piensa la cultura y cuya obra, tanto como comisario, ¿no? A través de sus exposiciones, como crítico, como teórico, a través de sus libros, ha ido marcando toda una época del arte contemporáneo. Yo creo que es uno de los que mejor ha cartografiado lo que ha sucedido en el arte, fundamentalmente desde los 90 en adelante, pero incluso en toda la modernidad. Seguro que conocéis, pues, sus contribuciones fundamentales a la historia de la crítica del arte, del comisariado, estética relacional, ¿no? Que marcó una época y que la sigue marcando todavía en la crítica, en el comisariado, en la práctica artística, postproducción, radicante, la exforma y este último libro, Inclusiones. Falta aquí, precisamente, el libro que publicó el CENDEAC, que a mí es uno de los libros que más me gusta. De hecho, puede ser mi libro favorito, Formas de vida, sobre el universo del trabajo y la idea del arte o de la vida como obra de arte. Me parece un libro fundamental para entender lo que ha sucedido en el arte desde finales del siglo XIX y que se publicó en el CENDEAC y que lo tenéis también a disposición en la biblioteca, como todos estos libros, ¿no? NICOLAS BOURRIAUD, como conocéis, pues, bueno, fue fundador con Jérôme Sans del Palais de Tokio, ha sido comisario en muchísimos lugares, hasta hace poco director del Museo de Arte Contemporáneo de Montpellier, ha sido director de la Escuela de Bellas Artes en París, ha sido comisario de la Tate Modern, organizó la Trienal de la Tate, con otro libro que también es fundamental, que es Alter Modern, ese libro que también nos hizo pensar la historia del arte desde otros lugares. Y su último libro es Inclusiones, del que hablará, supongo, o sobre el que tratará este seminario, ¿no? Que habla de, pues, esa urgencia en la que vivimos, ¿no? El arte en la época del capitaloceno y en la época de la emergencia climática, ¿no? En la época en la que estamos, ¿no? Solo por eso, por supuesto, estábamos contentísimos de que estuviese aquí, pero también hay otra razón fundamental por la que estamos muy contentos, es porque después de 12 años vuelve a Murcia. NICOLAS BOURRIAUD fue el comisario del primer proyecto de arte contemporáneo en Murcia, el PAC, que se llamó Estratos. Hizo un seminario también aquí, que fue el Radicante, y luego un ciclo de conferencias, Heterocronías, y su trayectoria, pues bueno, para muchos de los que vimos la exposición aquel PAC, pues todavía tenemos grabadas algunas de las exposiciones. Le comentaba que todavía yo tengo grabada la exposición de Marc Dayonc sobre la cárcel en el Museo Arqueológico, que me parece que una de las exposiciones más bellas que se han hecho en Murcia, en todo lo que yo he podido ver, ¿no? Así es que nos hacía también muchísima ilusión que volviese a Murcia y que nos dejase, o sea, nos dedicase unos días y que estuviese con nosotros. Así es que muchísimas gracias, NICOLAS, por volver y por dejarnos aquí compartir contigo, te dejo tu tocho, compartir contigo estos 2 días y nada, muchas gracias de nuevo a todo el mundo por acompañarnos en este seminario. Ahí te quedas.
Muchas gracias, Miguel. Primeramente quisiera, desde luego si no puedo hacer toda la conferencia en castellano, pero hace demasiado tiempo que no he hablado y me faltan demasiadas palabras, ¿no?, para hacerla de una manera interesante. Entonces, pues, estoy muy feliz de volver aquí en un lugar que conozco muy bien actualmente, porque fue una parte del proyecto Estratos. Y gracias por estar aquí, ¿no? También. Voy a hacer una conferencia en dos partes. Como saben, las imágenes llegan mañana, ¿no? Okay. Hoy, pura palabras. And maybe I'm going to skip to English, just to... well. And I wanted to start this lecture with two events, actually, just to remind us which kind of situation we're actually facing and what do we talk about when we talk about what is called the Anthropocene, but I prefer to call capitalocene. I will explain later why. But in 2013 was the first year where there were more machines than human beings, human activities on the internet, actually. 2013, so it's almost 10 years now that there are more machines than the internet, more algorithms than human words on the internet. 4 years later, there's another event that was absolutely fascinating. In New Zealand, the Parliament of New Zealand voted for a river to be recognized as an entity that could actually represent its own interest and advocate on its own behalf, actually. This river was the Wanganui River, is represented by two nominees, one appointed by the Maori community, which lives there, and one appointed by the government. So for the first time, we had a natural entity becoming a subject of law, actually. So these two events are, for me, the polarities we're actually dealing with today. Knowing that we're now surrounded by a hyper-robotic surrounding. Again, today, actually, through what is called the high-frequency trading, in the US, actually, the economic system is completely computerized and animated by the impulses of algorithms performing operations at the speed of light, actually. So the economy is totally disconnected from human gestures, let's say, and from anything that's anything else than abstract, actually. Those are two major events, actually. This proliferation of machines and, on the other hand, little hope that we see the world we live in a different way. And we try to understand that it's not constituted with objects, but with subjects. And that's more or less what I'm going to try to say today. The term Anthropocene was invented by the scientist Paul Cruzen in 2001, but it became very famous, from 2015, more or less, and still there were many debates about, does it exist? Is it true that human activities are actually, transforming the geology and the atmosphere of the planet? So some people still don't believe it. It's harder and harder not to believe it, but still, some people do. But we are actually living in a context of massive deforestation, context of pollution of the soils, of the seas, of the air, and what we call global warming, equally. For example, just to give an idea, I curated the last Istanbul Biennial in 2019, which was called the Seventh Continent. And what is called the Seventh Continent is the mass of floating plastic elements in the ocean, in the Atlantic. And this mass is approximately 10 times the size of Spain, to give you an idea of so it's a continent that nobody wants to occupy, actually. It's another event that's really important. It's the first continent that no one wants to go to. It's the continent which is our guilty consciousness, in a way, and we could call it like that. It's exactly the opposite of what was called the New World discovered by Christopher Columbus. You know, it's a continent which is inhabited. It's a continent which is just constituted by the marks and the traces of our own activity. Oh my God. And so it's a kind of anti-New World. And this anti-New World is part of the world we're living in, actually, and that we have to deal with today. So that was for the context. And I decided to use the term capitalocene because I think, obviously, that what is responsible for this situation is not the human being in itself. It's an economic system, it's a production system. And it's obviously capitalism that we're talking about. So I think it's more accurate to call it capitalocene, to really be precise, let's say. And what is the first characteristics of capitalocene? It's a crisis of what could be called the human scale. The scale we're used to, actually, the world we're living in. The world that we spontaneously think about when we think about the world. This world is now from the past, because human scale is not functioning anymore. And this, and a few other points that I'm going to talk about, are deeply changing the way the artists are representing or manipulating the world. Nobody can ignore this. We all are actually immersed in the same world, and obviously this crisis of the human scale, I'm going to try to detail a little bit, is deeply transforming the way artists react, the way they see the world, the way they transform it into forms, actually. Also, there is a paradox. The more we see the massive effects of the human activities upon the planet, the more, as individuals, as human beings, we feel completely impotent in front of it. And this feeling of impotency, of this inability to believe that our actions will lead to an improvement, is something that is a kind of a terrible feeling that is affecting the whole humanity at the moment. Look at COP26 and what's going on there. So this paradox is also something which is related to the idea of the human scale. And this whole situation contributes to new ways of thinking, obviously. Because what the Anthropocene or capitalocene, is calling, what does it provoke? It leads us to negotiate again the terms of our relationship to all the other inhabitants of this planet. It obliges us to renegotiate the terms of our presence on Earth. So how could not that change the way artists work? It's obviously the main element that is driving art today, and not only obviously. Well, because the Anthropocene or capitalocene produces a new set of parameters of our conduct, a re-evaluation of our relationship with all the forces that actually with which we must coexist on this planet. And that's not an easy work. In the recent years, not only the artists, but also the philosophers were confronted to this situation. And there's a French philosopher, Tristan Garcia, that I wanted to quote, is part of this movement called object-oriented ontology, or well, whatever. It's not the point. Tristan Garcia calls for what he calls the thinks that the philosophy in the recent years has been trying to look for what he calls the great outside. And the Anthropocene, according to him, expresses a certain wariness of the human subject, contemplating its own omnipresence on the planet. And it's true that, actually we seem to be wary of ourselves, tired of being so not only so present, but also overwhelming for this planet. Human subjectivity, he writes, seems to have exhausted itself in these cultural, economic, and existential loops that offer only glimpses of its own deformed reflection. The image of a species which is infeuded to its own technical power. So, he goes on, culture demanded a new outside. This outside manifested itself by the reappearance in today's aesthetics of nature without humankind, through the figure of the post-apocalyptic representing the world as it will be once we are no longer there, the world as it was in prehistoric times, if you want. And by a taste for horror as the representation of the limits of human representation. So interesting to see, it's actually a pattern that is here for a much longer time. I think the artists have been, for the last 30 years, looking for something outside themselves. And strangely, it started, we can actually talk about relational aesthetics in this regard. In the 90s, moment of the apparition of internet, moment of the rising of the industry of services, etc., there was a kind of need for an outside of the artistic practice that was the other, the neighbor, the community which was living here, etc., etc. It was inside the human community, but still it was a kind of asking for something outside of the artist as an individual, as isolated from the others. It's what Claude Lévi-Strauss, the anthropologist, has noted a long time ago already, calling it the self-colonization of the human by the human, because there's nothing else to colonize, actually. So in a very closed planet, what is left to colonize? Ourselves. That's why, for example, that the disparities existing in the 19th or the 20th century between countries are now within our own societies. The increase of the level of poverty, etc., etc. We are just self-colonizing ourselves all the time, and the colonized are now actually living in our cities. It's not the great outside here, it's in our own home. Lévi-Strauss, I go on with him, was noting something which is very smart and very, very interesting. He says, by acting as though we defended endangered peoples, endangered populations, but too late to be able to save them, it is rather ourselves that we feel sorry for and would like to protect. It's the cynicism of our times. Actually, it's very, I think, very well expressed in this sentence. And Lévi-Strauss goes on by saying, ourselves, that is, a humanity that has become too numerous on a terrestrial space it cannot extend. And that is consequently reduced to colonizing itself. You can find the equivalent in art in some ways. I see what is called now, because it seems to be a thing of the past, now postmodernism, as the paradigm of an aesthetics without exteriority, actually, swallowing itself. Art talking about art, and in a kind of loop, actually. Quotational, self-devouring, I would say. postmodernism was filled with references to the past of art, and also to, and its most recent development, to cultural identities, as something that was also to be self-devouring in a way, in this exact same way, I would say. So the quest for new interlocutors was, according to me, the main subject of art in the last 25 years. As I told you, it started, and that's what I try to describe in relational aesthetics, it started by looking for the interlocutor who's next to you, actually. And then it expands more and more. And we see now in exhibitions, artists dealing with, like Pierre Huyghe, I'm going to talk about later on, maybe show some images tomorrow, working with bees and ants and viruses, bacteria, etc., etc. This quest for new interlocutors has become super huge, actually, and now seems to be the obsession of the artist today. But relational aesthetics and what I'm talking about, the artist I'm talking about in this first book, happened in a world which was not saturated by images in the 90s. It was still not the case. Quite saturated, but not as saturated as we are now. Imagine that today, on one day, actually just today, there were more than 3 billion images circulating and produced on the social networks. Images are like a secretion, like something we produce, like the bees produce honey, or something like that. And so it puts into question what an artist is here for, also. In the Middle Ages, artists had the monopoly of the image production, which was actually, in Europe, very much controlled by the church. They had the monopoly of this. And there were a few resistant elements, of course, but mainly it was a very framed activity. Today is exactly the opposite. So the role of the artist may not be to produce more images, or produce more objects. In the 1960s, the American conceptual artist Douglas Hubler was saying that the world is already full of objects. I don't want to add more. So his task as an artist, according to him, was to reflect on the existing ones and try to, maybe, at least for him, give those images a new set of meaning, replace them in a totally different context, grow them in a way, like a farmer grows, some his or her products. So one of the characteristics of our time is this oversaturated milieu of images. I think it's the movie maker David Lynch who's speaking of Hollywood as a kind of city, or Los Angeles in general, as a city which is polluting the world with images. It seems to him that there's coats and coats of images, exactly like the coats of pollution in the era of Los Angeles. I think this poetic image has something very true, actually, and very accurate. And another element which is absolutely essential also is the fact that we are actually assisting to a completely new parametering, a completely new definition of the existence of the minuscule, the tiny, the invisible, and the massive. Because what drove history in the last 2 years? What created history in the last 2 years except something we just cannot see? Fucking virus. That we're not able to see, actually, which is just around us and here. What's the motor of history? Karl Marx was saying in the 19th century it was the proletariat. I'm afraid that today it's the invisible. The virus, the bacteria, but also gas. Obviously you cannot see it neither. But gas is, and it's in its multiple forms actually, including the ones which are used by police, are also a matter of history. Glyphosate, the pesticides, for example, are also a matter of history today. And all those elements are invisible. Another invisible element that is driving history of humankind is the degrees of temperature between now and the catastrophe. Is it 2 degrees? Is it 4 degrees? The thing is, we cannot see it neither. So we're actually all dealing with the invisible as the main and most important thing, in our lives. It's, in a way, it's very interesting for artists. Paul Klee was saying that painting makes things visible, and it's actually true. I think that what's interesting today is assisting to this very diverse efforts made by the artist to represent those invisible strengths, working around us, to materialize their effects or their activity around us, and to try to see the world not as constituted with objects or only human beings, but also all those things that we don't see, all those elements which are all part of our social life, actually. And here we are. I'm going to talk about it more tomorrow, because the idea of non-humans participating to social life is something that the Amazonians taught us, actually. For the Runa people, in Amazonas, the animals and the vegetables and the trees, etc., are part of the social life. And this is something we, Western people, were absolutely not able to do. And this is one of the things that has to change in the next years. But we'll come back on it tomorrow for the ones who will be patient enough. So you have guessed that obviously all those elements, those invisible elements, are destroying a little bit more what we call human scale and the very stable world in which we thought we were living. But actually we're not. We're living in a totally different world than the one that is represented in the last 2,000 years of human art. And that's also a fascinating period for this. There's another element, a second element. We're talking about the human scale. There's another element which is provoked by the Anthropocene. It's a new sense of, again, a completely different way of seeing distances. Promiscuity, proximities, and distance. This has completely changed also in the last 20 years. We now know that, for example, a little thing that went out of a laboratory in China, is actually here in this room. We know that if you buy some Nutella, actually you help the deforestation of the Malaysian forest. Everything is connected. What we thought was very far is actually very close to us. And, strangely, it's also the opposite. Yeah, there are people here, I'm sure, in the street, that are much further from us than the pangolin or a bat, of China. We are living in a world which we cannot trust by our eyes anymore, and that's a total revolution in a way, and that's coming directly from this ensemble of events and elements that we call Anthropocene or capitalocene. the anthropologist Anna Tsing, who wrote a fantastic book about about globalization, actually centered on a little mushroom that grows in the northwest of the United States and Canada. It's called the mushroom of the end of the world. Anna Tsing. It's very interesting. She describes the current catastrophe we're living by saying that the main problem today is the problem of space. For example, there's no escape and no space for some animal species, and this promiscuity is already creating new diseases, obviously, but will create in the future even more diseases. We are getting a new promiscuity with the animal because they just get closer and closer because their habitat has been destroyed. So, strangely, you see a representation of the world which is a kind of agglomeration of elements which were very far away one from another before, but which are becoming, very close. And here you have images in your mind, obviously. The accumulation, the things and beings brought up together, actually. A kind of crazy Hieronymus Bosch painting, And it's something you can find very easily in today's art, also this feeling, which is literally the transcription of an intuition, But we'll see that. So this promiscuity also creates another pattern, which is very frequent. Also, it's the pattern of the loop, a form which is closed on itself. And I would just quote two elements. One was actually the mad cow disease of the late 1990s, early 2000s. I don't remember exactly which year it was, but maybe it was 2001, I'm not sure. The mad cow disease has been provoked by cows being fed with cow powders, actually. Dead cows transformed into powders and given to feed the cows. We had the same with fish, actually. Fish eating powders made of dead fishes, etc., etc., etc. With this kind of fucked up, way of thinking, because this is one. You have exactly the same in economy. Actually, today, money makes money more than anything else. It's exactly the same pattern. What was called the Ponzi pyramid. This kind of swindle. This American guy Madoff was actually doing, using money just given to feed a kind of completely crazy machine of money making money. This is all the same. It is a pattern which crosses the economy, the way we inhabit the planet, etc., etc. And the pattern of the loop is obviously something you can try to find also in contemporary art. And I might show some examples also tomorrow. But this promiscuity, this new short circuit, these new foldings, making things that are not supposed to meet, as a reason. It's not exactly the crisis of the human scale, it's the crisis of distance. And distance become a very problematic issue today. We don't have it anymore. There's no distance anymore. You see this kind of completely saturated world with things accumulating one next to the other. That creates this disparition of distance. And I would like to quote the art historian Aby Warburg, who at the very end of the 19th century went to visit the HOPI, civilization, villages in I think it's in New Mexico, actually, in the US now, if I remember well. They were the last, Hopi villages, and Warburg spent some time there as an art historian. He actually was working on the Italian Renaissance, so something which was very far away from it. But that's during his trip to New Mexico and his frequentation of the Hopi people, where he discovered the ritual of the snake and many things that impressed him for the rest of his life, that he suddenly understood something which I've been trying to work about, an intuition which is absolutely amazing. He was writing, I quote him, telegraph and telephone, which are the two most powerful, communication tool of the time, late 19th century. Telegraph and telephone are destroying the cosmos. But myth and symbols, in attempting to establish spiritual bonds between man and the outside world, create space for devotion and scope for reason, which are destroyed by the instantaneous electrical contact. I'm going to try to commentate this. So telegraph and telephone, our ways of communicating, which developed massively in the 20th century, are, according to Warburg, destroying the cosmos. What does he mean by this? It has to be related to the conception of the artwork, according to Warburg. And it is a conception of the artwork which is linked with energy and electricity, in a way. He sees artworks as signals. What does an artist do when he or she, creates an artwork? You create a signal, literally. And a signal is something that has to be meaningful for someone else. So it has to go on as a signal as long as possible, actually. So you need energy for this. And here it's more my intuition, of the theory of Warburg. I think that this energy that's needed for a signal to perpetuate itself and touch people not only from their generation but for the next centuries is exactly what we call in the Western world beauty. That's the energy. Beauty is a word which is not very much used today. I totally admit that. We try to avoid it in a way. It's a bit kitsch, or beauty, what does it mean? But I think it's a very interesting concept, in a way, as seen as an energetic concept. What is beauty? But the possibility for a form to perpetuate itself, because it's not only making something nice. No, that's not the issue. It's a combination of, I would say, visual strength, complexity, because beauty is always complex. If you look at, what are we still looking at today from the 15th century, we are actually still watching and still admiring the most complex artworks, the ones that are actually resist to their exhaustion by our interpretations. And this capacity of resistance to interpretation is part of what I call beauty, actually. I think it's, in a way, but it's a totally gratuitous, idea. In a way, I think it's the same for human beings, in a way. Seduction is nothing to do with beauty, for example. Beauty is a long-term strength. It's a capacity of going on, a kind of energetical, lasting, flow or flux, actually. Paintings, artworks resist, what oblivion, let's say, resist insignificance. Not all, huh? No, for any generation of artists, time makes a huge selection, obviously. But sometimes also time makes mistakes, and we are constantly looking back, to see what we got wrong about, For example, El Greco, was not very much considered, before the mid-19th century. He has been neglected for many, many decades. Why? That's interesting. It's generally we are also dependent on our ready-made thoughts of our, mental frames, I would say. Today, for example, it's obvious that the massive rediscovery, of female artists from the 20th century comes from the end of the préjugés that were actually circulating within our European societies and American societies, etc., etc. Reevaluations come from movement that is circulating in a society. So this idea that artworks need energy to go on is coming also from the idea that there is a cosmos to welcome them. And that's the cosmos that Aby Warburg thought was destroyed by telephone and telegraph, to quote him. Cosmos is space. It's disencumbered, open, receptive space. You have room, actually, to think. You have room to see. You have room to discuss. I think that's what Aby Warburg was talking about when he was talking about this cosmos. And obviously, it's also this. What we talk about here it's the opposite of the contemporary communication, with its immediateness. For example, I guess, I don't know if this lecture is streamed, on streaming or something like that, but you have this immediate thing which destroys space, which actually, destroys the cosmos that this room is, in a way. It crushes time, it crushes distance. That's exactly the experience we had the last 2 years with Zoom conferences, which creates a completely new sense of promiscuity, a totally new sense of human scale, totally new sense of distance. And all those elements combined, actually, the pillars of the main problematics, I would say, of today's art. Because what is the power of art in this age of immediacy? Because the art is, in a way, the opposite of this. It requires time. It requires a bit of distance. It's the German philosopher Walter Benjamin was describing the artwork in terms of what he called the aura of a work. This aura, which is kind of halo, which is surrounding generally. It's almost a religious term, actually. It's a term which is borrowed to the religious vocabulary. It's the sacred as an aura, in general. And Benjamin defined the aura, which was, according to him, in a very famous text he wrote in 1935, called the artwork at the edge of its technical reproducibility. Sorry, it's a fascinating text. He was trying actually to compare the aura of the paintings in history of art to the new media that were actually popping up in the 1930s, cinema, etc., etc., the possibility to reproduce multiplicity of images. This, according to Walter Benjamin, was deeply transforming the idea of art. So what could we say today? No, it's obviously it went even further into that direction. And what is interesting here is that Walter Benjamin defined the aura as the unique apparition of a distance. It happens once when we see it. And what do we see if we look at a painting from Goya, for example? We see literally something from the past. The gestures that were actually used to produce this object are located in the past. We are looking at a ghost, in a way, in other words. What we see is the past. And any artwork comes from the past, even if it was made last week, actually. So here, we already have a distance, which is given to us as an ontological condition, as a prerequisite, if you want, for art. When he discovered the caves of Lascaux, he saw the parietal paintings in Lascaux. The French writer Georges Bataille went into a little bit the same direction. He was saying that the meaning of those works, of the bulls in the caves, and all the paintings in Lascaux or Altamira, it could have been Altamira too, according to him, their meaning, I quote, shows in their apparition, not in the durable thing that remains after their apparition. And here we have, at the same moment, more or less, the same idea. The idea that art has to do with distance, and that distance is constitutive of its power, actually. The artwork's specific character lies in a distance. It lies in its strength of apparition, also. And here I'm not going to dwell too much on it, but there's a great text that the American abstract painter Barnett Newman has written, which is called "The Sublime is Now." And his idea of the sublime was precisely laying on this idea of apparition, of a distance, and he took actually also his references into Native American art. The work of art for Barnett Newman reveals itself in a now. When he says the sublime is now, it means literally that it's the now that counts. And this unique moment where things appear to us is actually, the most important element in our appreciation of art. But the disappearance of the original, let's say, in the visual regime that we are living under for now more than a century, where original images are less and less present in our lives. We are surrounded with copies of copies of copies of copies. We are surrounded by, duplicata, in a way. Then this abolishes let's say, the archaic past of the artwork and the present of its apparition at the exact same time. We don't have the past anymore, and we don't have the present. If we look at a picture on Instagram, We don't have a past, we don't have a present, we have a kind of flow, actually, which has nothing to do with the coordinate of time and space that we are used to. It's something totally different. And this endless proliferation of images is deeply, modifying our appreciation for art. Another proof that the artwork has to do with energetics is that artists actually have a specific wavelength. You recognize an artist very easily from his or her way of combining elements. It's not necessarily because he or she is repeating the same thing. It's because he or she has a wavelength, and emits a specific wavelength. It's also energy based. The most important thing is not having a style, because style is the repetition of something. It's having a specific wavelength upon which you can emit, and the multiplicity of forms that you will produce will always be related to this recognizable wavelength. It's all about energetics. And energetics has a lot to do with what I was talking about first, about the Anthropocene, about our geopolitical situation. It could be a conference in itself, actually, but Western modernism is based on something which is very close to the idea of colonization, the progress, the idea of exponential growth. And there are lots of references in 20th century art, which was the core of this idea of progress, this idea of exponential growth, that we could spill things and make them explode, for example. Think about all the explosions that are existing in 20th century art. It's not only James Bond, it's also futurism, it's also Dada, it's also Jackson Pollock, in a way. Exploding forms, spilling elements. And this would be very interesting to just make a specific history of this. Spilling, wasting, exploding. Western modernism. And now, what? There's a little thread I'm following at the moment concerning this. I talked about the aura as the concretization of a distance, the apparition of something which is far away. And today, the promiscuity I was telling you about creates exactly the opposite of this. What is the opposite of the distance? It's something which is borrowed to the musical vocabulary. It's Larson effect. Larson effect happens when two amplifiers are too close one to another. And it creates what's called a stridency. I don't know if you say stridency or stridency, I forgot. But a very ugly sound, in a way. And also, the characteristics of the Larson effect is, and it's very much employed also in contemporary music, its characteristic is it's based on two things that are overlapping. And again, things that overlap are not at their place. They are melting, opposing each other and occupying the same space, which is too small. So you see how this idea of the Larson effect sums it up, actually, completely. If we have really, if it's painful to listen to, that's the world we live in. And it's created by the very structure and the very logics of this world. Here I could actually show two images. I just think about it now, but one would be a painting, a painting by a young Canadian painter, Ambera Wellman, whom I think is one of the most interesting painters today, where the forms are constantly overlapping, actually, and oriented towards a kind of very material eroticism, I would say. No, but once I say that, it's very bad for me not to have a picture. I could oppose this this image of Ambera Wellman to one installation by Pierre Huyghe, where, for example, just to quote, just to describe one of his recent installations in Arles at the Luma Foundation in the south of France. He has a very huge space, actually, where which is a permanent installation, where you have both bees, actually, working and producing honey, actually, ants, cancer cells, which are actually also grown, actually, in the installation itself, and images which are produced by a kind of connected brain, actually, through a very complex algorithm. All those elements are just playing together, actually, overlapping all the time. Nothing is distinctly at its place, and the chaotic, version of nature controlled or opposed to algorithms is a pretty good realistic description of the world we live in, I think. So I'm gonna go to another step, actually, in this speech. I've been trying from the beginning to describe spatial elements that were brought by the Anthropocene. The patterns, the visual patterns that are actually behind it. But there is also an intellectual pattern, which is very important to me, and I would sum it up, and I sum it up in the book, actually, by saying it's the end of binaryism, the binary oppositions upon which Western thought is built upon for 2 millenniums, actually. And I think we see them collapse very spectacularly today. And that's why it's also an exciting historical moment. I really believe that the first effect of Anthropocene in our brains is to destroy the opposition between nature and culture. If we, human beings, can modify the climate, the geology of the planet we live in, what does culture mean then? What does nature mean? It's all the same. It's all intertwined. And it's impossible to distinguish nice humans inhabiting an abstract space. No, it's not possible anymore. So what it leads to, unconsciously even, the end of the division between nature and culture. And I want to go back to the root of this idea. And in inclusions, I'm trying to develop the hypothesis that the root of it all is the Aristotle's poetics, well, strangely enough. But there is one idea, one very simple idea in this book, which has been recuperated by absolutely everyone, and that we think is totally natural, but it was invented actually by Aristotle. Is this idea and that art, creation in general, is always the opposition of form upon matter. You're gonna tell me, but yeah, of course that is what creation is about, because we don't question this thing anymore. it seems natural, normal, banal, but actually it's the most revolutionary idea, ever. This simple idea that to create means to print a form upon matter. It creates a chain of consequences which actually finds its resolution in the Anthropocene. I'm going to try to explain that, of course. If there is form upon matter, it also means that there is something active upon something passive, right? And here starts the problems. Because this very binary opposition, the first binaryism, I call it, takes us to through the notion of active as opposed to passive. It will lead us to the civilized against the savages. Active, passive. A form, our great European form, has to be imposed as a form upon the matter of those people, because there's nothing else than matter. And if you read actually the description made by the first colonizers in the 16th or 17th century, they literally talk about the people they invade as matter, as almost either animals or do they have a soul, etc., etc. And for me, the original problem is this idea of matter and form, the illemorphic system. Ile, the matter, morph is the form. The illemorphic system. This illemorphic concept goes for everything. It's also the root of the patriarchal system, obviously. Active, passive. You have a very precise frame that is going to be spread out in the future centuries. And for example, in the Bible, you can find in the Genesis, for example, you have this idea that humankind is supposed to be the active force and regulate the passive world of animals and vegetables and etc., etc. You always have this, active-passive pattern that's circulating in all the systems of oppression and domination. It's the common point, actually. And it all starts with this idea, which is the idea of form upon matter. But you're going to tell me, but we will in a few minutes understand that there is another system possible. There's another idea which could actually be as productive. And most of all, it's the division between nature and culture which created the world we're living in, obviously. And for many, many different reasons. Even Claude Lévi-Strauss, again, who's one of the main characters of this book, the person I talk to in a way in the whole book, kind of a red thread in the book. In The Savage Mind, which is interestingly badly translated actually in English, because it's French, it's La Pensée Sauvage. It's not the savage mind. Mind is spirit. It's totally different. La pensée sauvage implies that there is a thought, so a philosophy, which is wild and not savage. It's totally different. in the savage mind, let's call it that way, then, I don't know the title in Spanish, but I'm sure it's closer to the original. Pensiero salvaje? Okay. Well. Lévi-Strauss says, the opposition between nature and culture, to which I attached much importance at one time, now seems to be of primarily methodological importance, saying that, okay, it's just to make myself understood that I do that, but I don't believe there's such a thing than nature as opposed to culture. Because for Lévi-Strauss, but we're going to talk about it more tomorrow, the opposition between nature and culture, I quote, is not objective. It's human beings who need to formulate it. And it's this division between nature and culture was a way to justify the destruction of the planet, its definition as something passive, inert, etc., etc. If you read, it's very interesting, if you read the British philosopher Francis Bacon, who wrote in the 17th century, you will find a way to describe nature in absolutely sexually aggressive terms. He actually uses the word rape to talk about nature, the idea of extraction, extractivism, open the belly of the earth to get the gold or stones or etc., etc. It's a rhetorics of rape, literally, and it's all related for me to this original primordial image, which is matter, form upon matter. The goal of Claude Lévi-Strauss, actually, when he writes, about the Amazonian, mythologies, is, I quote him again, to reintegrate culture within nature and eventually life within the wood of its physico-chemical conditions. In clear, we human beings produce ideas the same way that apples produce trees. It's a secretion of ourselves. We are part of nature. There's nothing in any of the concepts that Lévi-Strauss wrote about that was not, according to him, part of a unique reality, which is not nature on one side, culture on the other side. The human being, he writes, is not distinguishable from nature, and what he concludes about is the idea of monist way of thinking. You're not dualist, but monist, one opposed to two. And that's where today's artists actually have understood something which is fundamental, because that's a kind of a very spontaneous way of thinking for many of them. They are actually envision the world in terms of co-activities. It's not human activity in a passive ground. It's entering through art within a world which is already populated with subjects, which is full of other beings, and not an abstract, neutral, passive matter. Here, just the fact of representing the world in this way changes absolutely everything. And here we go back to the Wanganui River. If you see the Wanganui River that I talked about at the beginning of this speech as just water passing by, and that could actually be used to plant things and to take showers, etc. It's one thing. But if you start seeing it as a subject, then the world changes in front of us. It's a totally different world. And what I call coactivity is, in a way, the extension of relational aesthetics, of this interest that the artists have for the realm of human interactions, to a different type of interactions, which expands to animals, to machines, to plants, to minerals, to whatever being is around. And then the conversation is totally different, obviously. And that's where there's a new generation of artists, I could quote a few of them in the last part of this speech, who are actually practicing what I call a molecular art, molecular anthropology of the world we're living in, actually. And I define it as, in a very simple way, I try. It's the study of the effects, traces, and marks left by human beings in the universe, and the study of their interactions with non-humans. It's getting out from the human scale to really go into something different, not seeing the world anymore as an object, because this is not an object if you look at it differently. It's an atomic structure composed of many different things, which are very complex. Not talking even about the water which is inside. But the plastic, obviously, you can make a sociology of it. You can actually consider it, as a molecular, reality. And it's incredible to see how many artists are today working with not only with matter, but with fluids, with dust, with small elements, viruses even. Pierre Huyghe did, bacteria. Swiss artist Pamela Rosenkrantz actually diffuses. How is it called? What the cats produce actually when they, which is actually invading our brains. Cats are very nasty people. But I don't know if you remember the word of this. I just forgot. Pheromones. No, thank you. And why is it important today to consider the molecular reality, and why artists are actually dealing with that? It's because they are materialistic as opposed to idealistic. And what is the main component, the main characteristics of capitalism? It's idealistic. Maybe it can be shocking if I say that this way. But capitalism is based on idealism. In which way? Bill Gates wrote in the 20 years ago or something like that, a book which is explains it all in a very clear way, actually, about the project. He says, I'm dreaming of a world without friction, because that's exactly what is the best for capitalism, is a smooth flux of communication. This is an obstacle, which is bad. Capitalism needs frictionless spaces. And the most important tool for this is, of course, the screen. The screen is frictionless, so that's why it multiplicates the commercial interactions. That's exactly why, it's an idealism. Plus, capitalism reduces all the elements of the universe to one single thing, which is money. And money is a totally idealistic object, if you think about it. Everything we are surrounded with could be translated into a sum of money. But if we think about it a bit more carefully, it's totally crazy. Because this bottle, okay, it's very similar to other bottles, but every object in the world is different in a way. And it's absurd to think about what Marx called a general abstract equivalent. And this general abstract equivalent, which is money, standardizes everything, reduces everything to one single, potentiality, which is money. What is interesting in the practices of those artists that are practicing what I call molecular practices, who try to see the world at its molecular level rather than the level of products or objects, let's say. It's that what is interesting is that they intensify reality by valuing each being or each object as something which is composed, in a unique way. Actually, we are all human beings, of course, apparently, but each of us is different, and it would be quite shocking to think that we could be just sold the same price because we are human beings. Well, at least it would shock me. Well, maybe not to so many people anymore. But, art does exactly the opposite of this. It actually insists on the singularity of each being, of each situation, of each object, however you call it. And in terms of composition, what I see in the studios, what I see in the exhibitions today, is artists who are actually getting out of the Ile-Morphe system, of the form upon matter system. How can they? Very simply, the visual translation of this is a figure on a background. And if you consider that every thing is a being, there's no background, there are no figures. You only have molecules or that are interacting. There's no background. The very notion of background, which is actually let's go to the Prado. It's full of figures upon background. That's the way the Europeans have represented themselves for 2 millenniums, mainly since the Fayum portraits, in the 2nd century. And this very simple formula is already a revolution in itself, according to me. The old conception of art as the imposition of a form on raw matter, if you want, is something completely obsolete to me. Everything is the background for something or someone else, but everything and everyone is a subject. There's no background on one side, subject on the other side, the same way that there is not such a thing as nature on one side and culture on the other. And that's this pattern that is really revolutionary. That's a revolutionary potential, I would say, which is brought to us by the Anthropocene, by the catastrophe, in a way. Artists today merge the characteristics of form or images together with those of matter. That's why so many times artworks obey to the same rules than the composition of a living organism. And artists can consider their way of composing as composing a kind of ecosystem, more than just an image representing a figure on a background. But maybe the simplest way to express this idea is to remind to us that our own body actually is already a sort of zoo, containing billions of bacteria. We are literally multiple. We may have a human shape, but we are also sheltering multiple forms of life that we have actually no idea of for it's very recent that we actually understood that in the history of the humankind. So all human activity is actually a co-activity, led with others. It's the management of a kind of relationship with very diverse forms of life, very diverse beings. And I would define art today, especially, as a place where the human and the non-human intertwine in a productive way. Because in our ages, we see actually the coexistence also of both organic growth, digital development, the expansion also of our lives under digital control also. Us, as self-colonized by our own production system, are becoming the very material here for the new economy. We are looked at by the system. We are actually analyzed as data. We are controlled by a machine which leads us actually to feed the economy in itself. And here's another loop. The digital age, is actually a loop in this regard. So it's not possible anymore, and that's where actually relational aesthetics has been written in the 90s and would not be possible today in a way, because human relationships are now absolutely impossible to inseparable, let's say, from algorithm reducing the human mass into information, which is exploitable by the merchant system. So yes, the Anthropocene is really a new set of parameters. It actually obliges us to rethink the way we coexist on this planet with lots of different subjects. And maybe the role of art, as based on the idea of singularity, the singularity of each form of life, is to create, expand the realm of the subject, and not keeping this status for ourselves, but to accept to live exactly like the Amazonian Indians, the Runa, that the anthropologist Eduardo Kohn was visiting and has worked with. A forest think, as Eduardo Kohn says, forests think the same way as human beings think. We know that trees are communicating anyway. Now it's a proven fact, which is quantifiable even. So I would love to think of an art exhibition as a kind of forest, producing thing, like a kind of symbiosis, where you have very diverse beings, and where we're more attentive, careful to signals, actually, because those signals are actually what art is about. And maybe I see that I went largely over my time, so I will stop here. But
Pues muchísimas gracias, Nicolás, por la charla. Es tiempo ahora para que preguntéis o comentéis cualquier cosa. En español, te da el español para que sea la pregunta, ¿no? Sí. Probamos.
Vamos a ver.
Y si no, pues... Si podemos subir un poco la luz, y así, porque si no se ve la... Esto parece una subasta. Adjudicado, Enrique. Vale. Enrique, bueno, si hablas por aquí te puede traducir
Maybe the path for the art is to recover those stolen images, because the saturation of images, they are all the same. They are images of money.
Yeah.
And
but you're right to say that, images. Maybe it's not, images that are too many. It's degenerated images. And maybe also that artists never produced images. Maybe they were producing something else, from the beginning of times, actually. Maybe the bulls and the Altamira, and the horses in the Altamira caves are not images. That's what I believe, in a way. It's more than that. So when I say quickly, there are too many images, of course we don't talk about this same kind of images. And I would not, if I had to really go deeper, I would say that artists never produced images. It's not what it's about. It's not what art is about. And never was, even if it's figurative painting. It's not images, it's something else. It's the elaboration of a space-time which is not reducible to its readability as an image. It's more complex process. It's the encryption of many different informations that are not in the images we have on Instagram, of course.
Thanks.
Ahí atrás.
Ambera Wellman. Ambera Wellman. Ambera Wellman. Could have quoted here Talamadani, who's a very interesting painter. But
¿Más cosas? Aquí. Vale. Si lo hacéis en español, mejor, y así dejamos al traductor.
Inglés.
Bueno, decía, dejamos al traductor descansar.
okay.
I'm not a Spanish speaker. Well, I am, but not such a good one. So thank you for your lecture. I wanted to ask you, as you pointed out, that I kind of believe we actually achieved perpetuum mobile, like we are all the time driving for achievement. So with capitalism, with hierarchy, with inequality, the people that never got to the place, they still want to get to the place. And things are irrelevant because we live further away from production sources, so there is mass production, so the production amount is irrelevant for the needs, and we don't have any more critical thinking. We are completely visually driven. I feel like we live in this visual thinking, and it's very fast. At the same time, we base everything on science, so so precisely that we cannot make a step away from science, which really is shown in this pandemic crisis, where once decision upon science is made, it cannot be reversed anymore. So I'm thinking, as capitalism is actually a critical system, it means like you cannot almost dismount it because it means war, and it doesn't go into a humanitarian activist way of seeing reality. It doesn't really bring the feminism, the ecofeminism that we fight for. Then yet I feel like there is a speed problem, because if you say let's rethink, it's too slow for the fast going capitalistic, capitalocene world. And so my question is, do you feel like the change should be within capitalism, so like changing capitalism from the inside, or it's actually impossible just because of its matter, the way the matter is constructed? It kind of doesn't let you change it because it's already the structure opposite of you try to actually do, or it's about dismounting capitalism and rearranging it differently.
Well, it's the Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Žižek was saying that it's easier for people to envision the end of the world than the end of capitalism, and I think there's a lot of truth in here, because it's just this fundamental structure we're living in, first. But market economy is not exactly capitalism, for example. We have two different things here. Capitalism is a very specific form of market economy, and the big problem today is that it seems difficult for people not to understand that. You're saying, the problem of speed, actually, too slow. But if we actually agree on the rhythm of capitalism, it has won, in a way. I think slowness can be also an answer to things that you should not confuse with the idea of emergency. It's not two different things, according to me. You can answer to an emergency quickly, but by being slow. It might even be the answer sometimes. Same way when science that you mentioned as a driving force, etc., is not necessarily for me the problem. The profit-oriented mind, and profit-obsessed mind might be the problem rather than science, the same way. Again, I'm trying to, separate things that we spontaneously, gather together. And I think that's a very important thing to do today. Not to throw the baby with the water of the bath, as we say in French. We can separate science from this caricature of science that is actually in play now. We can also separate capitalism from market economy. We can also maybe find another answer in terms of thought than critical thinking. And that's something I really want to stress upon. I don't think that critical thinking is anymore the answer. And I can explain you why. For me, it has to do with being outside of reality. If you are critical, you're actually above something or besides something, near to something, and you distinguish yourself from what you actually criticize. Critical thinking may be a pattern that has lived also. I think if we are all immersed in a reality, we cannot be critical anymore. We have to do more than that, in a way. It's like when you do psychoanalysis, for example. Just you are your material. You work yourself on the material of your life, and you just rewrite the scenario of it. But that's the idea of psychoanalysis, as far as I know. And you rewrite the scenario, but you're actually in this kind of interaction. You're not outside of the process, you're inside and analyzing at the same time, not being critical, but having a different kind of thought.
Thank you.
¿Algo más? ¿Yo te puedo hacer una en español?
Sí.
Aquí. No, era solo como una curiosidad, y es en qué medida ese pensamiento salvaje sobre los nuevos objetos, sujetos del arte, ¿no? Lo que hace el artista, ese objeto, sujeto que se produce en el ahora y que genera conexiones, no tiene que ver también con esa especie de giro material que se produce tanto en las humanidades como en la práctica artística desde finales de los 90, ¿no? Que comienza a interesarse ya no solo por el significado, sino por la idea de presencia, ¿no? Que eso sobre todo, y tú lo has escrito en tus trabajos sobre la historia, ¿no? Está en la idea de el objeto que tiene alma, que trae el pasado, que no es solo un objeto, sino que está poniendo en movimiento la historia, ¿no? Entonces, quería preguntarte un poco si hay, aunque son dos campos distintos, este pensamiento de la estética del antropoceno, del capitaloceno, que viene por otro lado, y el pensamiento de la presencia, el giro de la vida de las cosas, la idea del alma de las cosas, ¿no? ¿En qué medida hay una conexión o simplemente son como dos tradiciones que piensan la subjetividad del objeto desde puntos diferentes? No sé si más o menos...
Yeah, it of course just brings something to my mind, and I would like to answer you like this. There's a great definition of capitalism by Guy Debord. In French, it's tout ce qui était directement vécu s'éloigne dans une représentation. Okay, just to remind it. Everything that was directly lived is getting far away and closed in a representation. And that's what we actually are living today. What we actually had the experience of directly before is now represented by something in society, and we don't live it anymore directly. And it calls for something exactly opposed to that. Thinking about representations as things, or artworks, as things that get us closer to life, get us closer to reality, get us closer to the presence of things, to the very being. And maybe that's one of the most important roles of art today. The spectacle, as Debord said, this idea that our lives are actually mediatized, and put into social networks, media, etc., etc., and we don't live anymore. We attend the spectacle of our lives, in a way, and it's even more true now with the social networks than it was when Guy Debord was writing it in the 60s. Artworks, representations, could actually help us to get out of this situation by a kind of work on the idea of presence, of engaging dialogues with the world in a different way. The same way Cézanne is looking at the mountain Sainte-Victoire, in the south of France, very carefully. The same way Shitao or the many Chinese painters were actually observing very carefully the reality that was surrounding them. The same way, we have many artists, today who are actually trying to get close to an object, get close to the invisible, get close to life in general, and that's a very important issue, according to me. Getting closer, because everything in our lives takes us very far from what should be reality and what should be life.
¿Algo más? Bueno, sí, espera. Aquí hay una y luego otra.
Puede ser en castellano.
Sí.
Quería preguntarle, porque descubrí hace poco que usted también es usuario de ciertas redes sociales como Instagram. Y como usuario de esas redes, ya que hoy en día puede ser hasta una decisión política, ¿no?, el alimentar ese imaginario colectivo, ¿no?, que sin embargo pertenece a, creo que es de Facebook, Instagram, no estoy tan al tanto. ¿Cómo planteas tú, digamos, tu situación en redes? ¿Cómo empleas Instagram? Si es como una herramienta, si lo empleas como un diario quizá, o no sé hasta qué punto te involucras en las redes sociales. ¿Cómo? Involucrar. A mí tampoco me sale. Introducirte dentro de lo que comentabas, que era como la ficción de la pantalla, ¿no? En vez de buscar el afuera, que parece que es un poco la no decir obsesión, pero sí puede ser el objeto de estudio, ¿no?, de tu trabajo, en términos generales, el afuera, el cómo nos relacionamos hoy en día con esas analogías casi biológicas, o no sé, ¿cómo ves tu presencia en redes? ¿Cómo empleas eso como herramienta o como ficción?
Pues muy sencillo. Generalmente las únicas cosas que pongo sobre Instagram son imágenes de obras que veo, o a veces platos que he comido, por ejemplo, que me interesa mucho la cocina contemporánea también, ¿no? Por ejemplo, Anna Ross con Soran Music, ¿no? Me interesa, es todo, ¿no? Es una especie de cuaderno, si quieres, ¿no?, para mí, ¿no? No.
Bueno, pues
No.
tenemos una última pregunta y sí.
Bueno, yo quería preguntarte, hay como, bueno, primero hacer una especie de pequeña reflexión previa, que hay como por muchos caminos, ¿no?, se llega, o muchas personas, o desde distintas disciplinas, se llega como a esta idea de la relevancia, o de que la solución a los problemas del presente se pueda encontrar en, por llamar de alguna manera, el perspectivismo amerindio, ¿no?, o la idea de esta mentalidad de los pueblos americanos, de los pueblos, digamos, que están en contacto con la naturaleza, su interpretación del mundo, del planeta, la humanidad, de todo eso, ¿no? Y la idea de que la salvación está en esa.
Despacio, ¿eh?
Sí, vale. Bueno, pues la idea de que la solución se encuentra en ese pensamiento, ¿no?, en esa forma de pensar. Que, bueno, pues que verdaderamente, bueno, yo por experiencias personales relativamente pequeñas, pero verdaderamente muy fascinante, ¿no?, como hay una manera completamente diferente de estar y de ver el mundo, ¿no?, y de sentirse en el mundo, ¿no? Pero yo me pregunto, o me empiezo a preguntar, y te pregunto a ti, hasta qué punto esta mitificación del pensamiento histórica, o como tú decías, porque efectivamente aquí se tradujo también como el pensamiento, y que tú dices que la traducción correcta sería la mente salvaje, ¿no? Pues hasta qué punto eso puede ser solución para toda la humanidad, por decirlo de alguna manera. O sea, creo que estamos, dijéramos, focalizando una fórmula para una humanidad gigantesca, absolutamente monstruosa, que creo que en número, en tamaño, ¿no?, en ocupación del territorio, yo empiezo a pensar que es como insuficiente, digamos, este giro hacia un pensamiento, hacia una cosmovisión del mundo distinta, ¿no? Esa es mi pregunta.
Pues es una gran pregunta, ¿no? Puede ser una otra conferencia, claramente. No, pensaba, voy a intentar de resumir lo que... Arte ha siempre estado una otra manera de componer la película que es la vida, ¿no? De cierto, editing table, ¿no? How do you say that?
Una mesa de edición.
Mesa de edición.
De edición, no, o de montaje.
No, de montaje, sí, más. Una especie de mesa de montaje alternativa de la película de la realidad social, ¿no? Y si miras a la evolución de la especie humana desde 1.000.000 de años, ¿no? 2.000 años desde, hay tantas formas de pensamiento que son totalmente, ¿no?, diversas, ¿no?, que tienen nada que hacer con... es una vegetación increíble, si piensas. Es increíble ver a qué grado la diversidad de las representaciones del mundo, maneras de pensar, ¿no?, de ver la realidad, es una colección increíble. Y la única manera para nosotros de entender esto es ir al museo, ¿no? Y porque hay una... the record is there, ¿no? Larson.
Sí.
Wow.
Muy bien, pues muchísimas gracias, Nicolás.
Mañana vamos a ver más
mañana
imágenes.
Más, y mañana veremos imágenes y muchas gracias a todo el mundo. Nos vemos mañana. Gracias.
Gracias.